Hey y'all. I'll be back Thursday, which is beautiful. Can't wait to be back with you guys. Man, and it's been hard for me being away because I just love this book so much. There's a lot here to unpack. So today, what I want us to do is I really just kind of want to break down a couple things. I want to do a very quick summary of what y'all read for today, and then want to look really at one theme, and then we'll move on. So it'll probably be about a 15-minute video. Make sure you have your book. Make sure you have a pen or a pencil, something to write down, because I do want to show you guys a couple things, and I want you to take a couple notes as we go through as well. But let's just do a super quick summary. You don't need to write this down at all, but just kind of where we are at the story, in the story until this point. And it starts with Princess Irene in chapter 5 goes back and tries to find the grandmother again, but she can't, right? And I asked you guys to consider in the last video, like why the grandmother doesn't reveal herself every time. And we're still not going to talk about that yet. But I do think it's interesting that if the grandmother is this God figure, this divine being, um, it seems like a God would want to reveal himself. A good God would want to reveal himself, herself, uh, anytime her children were looking for her, right? But this time it doesn't happen. And I do want y'all to flip to this one quote. It's on page 28, right? It's the last page of right before chapter 6, the last page of chapter 5. And it's this very last paragraph that's worth annotating. And it's her own doubt, right? So she's just had this really beautiful, crazy encounter with this mystical being, right? And then the next day she can't find her, and immediately she starts to doubt that maybe she's crazy. And it says this, that last paragraph. Her failure to find the old lady not only disappointed her, but made her very thoughtful. Sometimes she came almost to the nurse's opinion that she had dreamed all about her. Right? So it makes me think about my relationship with God, right? That, I have this, you have this moment where you're like, yeah, I'm I fully believe, I fully get it. And then the very next day you're like, maybe this is all a dream. Maybe I'm crazy. Right? And Princess Irene has that exact moment here where she literally got to experience God face to face, this grandmother figure as a representative of God. And the very next day she can't find her and she's like, maybe I'm crazy. Right? So that's kind of where we start off. This theme is going to keep playing around. And then what happens is Irene and Ludi the following morning they go out for a walk, and it gets dark, and the nurse Ludi starts to panic, right, because she's not supposed to have the princess out at night because of the goblins, and so they start running home. The goblins are like peeking around the rocks. This is very like intense. Obviously, it's not intense. It's for 10-year olds, but it's this intense scene where they're sprinting down trying to get home, and we meet Curdy the miner, right? They're saved by this little miner boy named Curdy. He's probably 13 or 14, a little bit older than the princess. And he scares the goblins off. And hopefully, you guys caught the way you scare the goblins off is by singing. So there's something there about light and art and beauty that scares away darkness. When we talk about, I've been telling you guys to annotate for the nature of darkness. That's the sort of thing that you should be noticing, right? Um, that there is this relationship, right? That the songs chase away the darkness, right? Light and darkness can't be together. So they're saved by Curdy, this minor boy who just happened to be walking out when they were there. And then the next couple chapters, we leave Princess Irene and the nurse for a while, and we go to Curdy, and he stays at night overnight to explore the mines, right? And it says that he was there mining because he wanted to earn some extra money. So the miners did that, right? They mine another night or through the night, excuse me, on their own to, make some extra cash. And so he wants to do it to buy his mom this coat that he feels like she deserves. Um, but he's also just kind of interested in what the goblins are up to, right? And it says he's not really afraid. He's been around them all the time. He knows how to scare them off with song. that he just makes up, right? And they scurry off. And so he decides to kind of explore the mines. And in the process, he breaks through into this goblin family's house and then follows them, just out of curiosity, back to the cavern. And he's in this cavern, and the king goblin is holding this assembly with all the goblins, right? And Curdy's kind of just like listening in. Um, and Cody finds out the plan of the goblins. And if you didn't fully understand this, that's okay. It took me a while to actually get it myself the first couple times I read through it. But he does find out the plan of what the goblins are up to. And there's two parts to this plan. So maybe write this down, actually. Let's go to go to the end of page 9, excuse me, page 9, chapter 9. So it's page 72. And there's like a little blank space right at the end of chapter 9 where we stopped off. And I want you guys to write this. This is the two parts of the goblins' plan. Part 1 is they're going to try and kidnap Princess Irene. Now, how do we know that? This is where, if you missed it, it's okay. On page 69, the King Goblin is talking, and he says this. He says, "Should His Majesty, representing himself, be successful, as who dares to doubt, then a peace, all to the advantage of the Goblin Kingdom, will be established for a generation at least, rendered absolutely secure by the pledge which His Royal Highness the Prince," meaning the Goblin Prince, "will have and hold for the good behavior of her relatives." So that's on the bottom of page 68, top of 69. Basically, what that means is that they're like, okay, we'll establish peace and we'll have power over the people above because we're going to kidnap the earthly princess, marry her to the goblin prince, and then basically she'll be like our. We'll have ransom over her, right? We'll have power over them because if they disobey us, we'll hurt the princess. Um, so don't worry. All you need to know is that part 1 of the Goblin's big plan is to kidnap Princess Irene so that they can have power over the people above ground. Part 2 of the plan is if that does not work, right? If they're not able to kidnap Princess Irene, on page 71, it talks about how what they'll do is that they'll then flood the mine, right? So if you look on this paragraph, this top paragraph on page 71, Curry's thinking about it, and he's like, "Oh, that's what they're going to do." So it's kidnap the princess. If they can't kidnap the princess, they're going to break open the mines because they know like where the water runs through the mountains because they live there, and kill all the miners. Right. So obviously the goblins are not friends with the people above ground, and so this is their plan to kind of regain power. And Curdy finds that out. Right. So that's where we're at in the story. Um, and hopefully you guys are following along relatively well. I know it was a decent amount of reading, but we'll slow down a little bit after that. Um, all right, here's what I want to look at today. This idea of lost and found, right? And I want you guys to go to your theme list on the back. And I want you to write down this question. This can be like number 2 on the theme list. So the theme lists, we'll look at these quotes. The theme list looks like this, right? We wrote this down yesterday. You will be found, but only when you've lost yourself. But on number 2, I want you to write, how do we navigate the journey home? All right, that's our unit long question. We've talked about how we're not home and we're trying to get home. And what we're going to look at this whole unit is how do we navigate that journey? And I want to show you something that I've found to be really beautiful from this book, that helps us answer that question. And what I want to show you is that every single time that the princess is found or finds something, it's only after she's completely lost, right? It's only after she's willing to admit that she's completely lost. And I just want to kind of read through these quotes. You don't need to write them down, but if you do want to, I mean, they're really beautiful. This is a book I'd hope that you would come back to down the road. So, if you wanted to go back and watch this video and underline them, you could do that. Um, But just look at this repeated theme again and again and again. With keeping this in mind, how do we navigate the journey home? So it starts on page 8, the first example. At last her hope failed her. She threw herself on the floor and burst into a wailing cry. Right? So this is when she like first finds the staircase and there's all these doors and she can't find her way back. And it says her hope failed her. She's lost. She has nowhere to go. She has completely no idea how to get back. In the very next page, at last, in a corner, she did see a stair. Right? She's found. We get the same thing a little bit later. She was lost once more. Right? He says it very explicitly. And suddenly it occurred to her that it was after having cried that she had found her grandmother's stair. So Irene remembers, oh man, the last time I was lost, it was only after I was hopelessly lost and I'd broken into tears that then I found where I needed to go. And then we get the very next page, actually, same page. This time, although she did not find what she hoped, she found what was next best, which is what she needed. Right? So we get the same thing. She was lost once more. She finds what she needs. We go on to the next example. This is when the nurse and Irene are out on the mountain, and the nurse cries out, "We've taken a wrong turning somewhere, and I don't know where we are. We are lost. Lost." Very next page. Presently, she saw a boy coming up the road from the valley to meet them. Right? Curdie finds them, Curdie saves them. Only after they admit they're lost. We keep going. I went upstairs and lost myself. Right? That's the princess speaking when she's telling her nurse. And if I hadn't found the beautiful lady, I should never have found myself. So she did find the beautiful lady only after she had lost herself. I went upstairs and lost myself, and if I hadn't found the beautiful lady, I should never have found myself. We get the same thing again. She had lost herself long ago. But it doesn't follow that she was lost because she had lost herself, though. Right? Hinting that she's actually being found once she loses herself. Right? So, I mean, just look at this. We have 5 incredible, like, they're not being fancy about this. He's just saying it. That only when you have lost yourself are you found. And so I want to go back to our theme list. Okay, how do we navigate the journey home? And I want y'all to write this as step 1, as like a bullet point under this question. Admit you're lost and that you can't find your way. Right? That is step 1 to getting home. Right? When we think about this in a spiritual sense, right? Actually, not even a spiritual sense. If somebody has, I mean, just think about it. If someone has cancer, right? The first step to getting well is to admit they're sick. Right? If you have somebody who refuses to admit they're sick, they cannot get well because they won't accept treatment. They won't go to a hospital. Right? If you have someone who needs to go to Alcoholics Anonymous, the first step is to admit that there's an addiction. Right? If they won't admit that there's an addiction, they're never getting well. They're never going to break that addiction. Right? If we want to navigate home, if we want to find wholeness within ourselves, step 1 is to admit that you can't do it, that you're lost. Right? Admit that you're lost and that you can't find your way. If you're not willing to admit that, you're never going to be found, right? Because you don't think you need to be found. Right? I mean, think about it. If you're lost in the city and you're trying to actually find your way back to your actual house, if you refuse to admit you're lost, you're just going to keep walking around and be like, I got it under control. And you'll just stay out there. Right? You'll get home if you go to a gas station and say, "Hey, I'm lost. Can you help me point my way?" Right? And then somebody will help direct you. But it's not until that you can admit you're lost that you'll be found. And so when we think about that in a spiritual sense, which this is a very spiritual book, and the grandmother a very spiritual character, um, if you can't admit you're lost, you're never going to find your way back. Right? If you cannot admit God, I can't do it on my own, right? I will not find my way back to you, right? I will not find my way to heaven. I will not find my way to wholeness, to home, to rightness, to shalom, to peace. Only then will he say, good, all right, right? Good thing I found you. If you think that you're like, hey, I got it, I'm going to figure it out, you won't, right? You absolutely won't. It's only when Truman was able to admit that he was living in a bubble that he was able to find his way out. It's only when the prisoners in the cave were able to admit that they've been living in shackles that they were able to find their way out, right? It's only when Dr. Stockman was able to admit that there was a problem with the water supply that he was then able to fix it, right? It's only when Odysseus is able to realize that he's not whole that he's then able to travel back to Ithaca, right? If Odysseus thought he was fine, he would never go home, right? And I just want y'all to think about that and just look at all of these instances of that. It's only when she's lost that she's found. And when we think about the way that she's found, who's behind the picture here? We can assume, right? We can assume the grandmother. We don't know that for sure yet, but we can assume the grandmother's up to something because she said again and again that she is taking care of Irene, right? And so, what I just want to leave you guys with is I want y'all thinking about, okay, what does this mean? What does it mean for me to admit that I'm lost and that I need help, that I cannot navigate my way home, right? And this goes back to our first theme. You will be found, but only when you have lost yourself, only when you admit that you're lost. So, guys, here's what I want y'all to do. Write this down somewhere. Here's what I want you guys to annotate for in the next two chapters. Chapter 11, I think, might be my favorite chapter in the book. That and chapter 15. Um, Much shorter reading section for Friday. Wait, is this getting to Friday? Yeah. Yeah. Much shorter reading section for Fridays, chapters 10 through 12. And I want y'all to really annotate for two things. One, in chapter 10, here, I'll just write that so that we don't forget. Does the king know about the grandmother? All right, so the princess's dad is going to come visit, and Princess Irene is going to tell her father, like, hey, there's this great, 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 great grandmother living upstairs, which obviously she'll probably sound crazy. Um, and I want y'all to kind of read between the lines. Does he know? Right? And I think that's what we'll discuss on Friday because there's a lot there, right? Does he know about the grandmother? You could argue he does, you could argue he doesn't. Think about the way he says things, kind of read between the lines. And then chapter 11, I want you to read it as a conversation with God. Imagine this is you having a conversation with God. What happens in chapter 11 is Irene, Princess Irene, is able to find her great grandmother again, this God figure. And oh man, it's just like it'll bring you to tears if you read it as a conversation with God that we're Princess Irene and we're talking to God. Um, and when you read it that way, I want y'all to think about what stands out, right? And you should have tons of annotations. Uh, in fact, yeah, Friday, expect a big annotation check specifically on chapter 11, but all the way through. So catch up if you need to. But what stands out about this conversation with God, right? What does the grandmother say? Remember to think in symbols, right? She's going to talk about light. She's going to talk about this thread. There's all these things that mean other things. But if you think about it as a conversation with God, what is it that really stands out? And then I'm also going to add for annotations, continue to look for things about being lost and being found, right? Both with Curdie and with Irene. Anytime it talks about Irene admitting she's lost and then being found, right? Or Curdie admitting he's lost and then being found. Look for that. Annotate for that. All right. So again, through chapter 12. So you'll read 10, 11, and 12 for Friday. Uh, Expect our chapters 1 through 12 thorough annotation check up until then. And what you'll do after this video is you're going to take another video quiz. This one's not going to be multiple choice. It's going to be more like your just honest feedback. And then I will see you all, some of you on Thursday, and all of you on Friday. So Godspeed.